On February 19th, 1949, Florence Dawes stepped off the White Pass and Yukon route train down onto the frozen wooden sidewalk at the foot of Main Street in downtown Whitehorse. She had with her one suitcase and her almost 2-year-old son slung over one hip. She had just turned 29 years old and she was 3 months pregnant. Now her husband Al, he had come up a couple of weeks before her to look for a place to rent and to find himself some work. And now Al, he had inhaled something, I guess, that he probably shouldn't have, hey? At the end of the Second World War there, and doctors had told him that his damaged lungs, they needed a dry climate. And he had heard all these stories about the Yukon, all full of tales, 2 jobs for every strong back, eh? All the fresh, dry air a fella could breathe. Now Al, the story goes, Al had originally dreamed of taking his young family to Australia, but who could afford it? So the poor guy ends up in the Yukon. Anyways, Flo now, she'd been born in London, England in 1919, and she was working in a munitions factory at the end of the Second World War making bullets when she met this Canadian soldier, and I guess fell in love, returned with him to Canada. Now, she had taken the boat from Vancouver up to Skagway, Alaska, and the train from Skagway all the way into Whitehorse. She was tired. Her feet hurt, and she wasn't dressed for the cold. The rest of the story goes something like this, only told in a kind of heavy Cockney accent, right? So Flo and young David, they sit on the bench at the end of Main Street there and they survey their new home. Nothing but mud, potholes, wooden sidewalks. Wasn't even any street lights yet. And there's no Al either, eh? And he was supposed to have met them there. She doesn't know what to do. They don't have phones up there yet. They don't even have power, really, so she can't call him. She doesn't know where he lives, so she just sits and waits, eh? And about an hour goes by. Her just sitting there in the cold. And finally, this American soldier, he pulls his truck over to the side of the road. He rolls his window down just a little bit so he can call out. Said, "Are you lost, lady?" "No," she says. "I'm just waiting for my husband." The soldier boy, he was horrified, eh? To find a pregnant woman and a young child left alone in February in the Yukon. So he drove straight over to the RCMP station there, got him to put out an APB on one Albert Dawes, ex-soldier and errant husband. And they tracked him down about an hour later, eh? Maybe an hour and a half. Drunk at a wedding on the other side of town. He forgot all about her coming in, eh? So the soldier, as the story goes, he loads Flo and young David up into his truck and they head over to pick up the old man. And this American guy, he was so disgusted with my grandfather that he wouldn't even let Al get up into the cab of the truck with the rest of them. He made him ride in the flatbed in the cold, eh? Al directed him to a little 2-room shack at the foot of Alexander Street, right next to the Clay Cliffs. Nothing but a bed, eh? And a wood stove and a old armchair in the corner. Built in a little hollow, too, eh? Had to dry the firewood out before you could get it to burn. Good. Buy your water by the bucket from the water wagon. What a life, eh? Good. What a life. Later on that summer, my mother was born. Florence Dawes would go on to raise up 5 children in a series of 2-room shacks and small houses in downtown Whitehorse. Not so much alongside the man she had married. More like in spite of him, actually, hey? Yeah. He passed away when I was about 9 years old of stomach cancer, sclerosis of the liver, general hard living. He was yellow and angry and weighed less than 100 pounds the day he died, and I'll be honest with you, he was not mourned by many. My most vivid memory of him is how he had these ancient, filthy, stained up, freaky-ass false teeth, and he'd hang them halfway out of his face like a monster, make weird monster noises, chase me and my little sister and my cousins around on the threadbare rug in the front room, hey, till one of us whacked a toe on a door jamb or something, or peed our pants. My grandma, she'd come squawking in out of the kitchen with her straw broom in her hand, say, "Knock that off, eh? The lot of yous will belt the snot out of someone. So help me." My gran, she's famous, eh, for belting the snot out of someone. For cooking up an unsliced up chunk of bologna that she got special from the butcher, cooking it up in the oven like a roast, eh? It was embarrassing. For taking the top 10 layers of your skin off on bath night with a sandpaper-like towel straight off the Yukon clothesline. Think about it. and for collecting wax paper, string, tin foil, rubber bands, and canned food. Florence Dawes had 5 children. She had 13 grandchildren. She has 11 great-grandchildren and 2 little dogs that never, ever stop yapping. She has had one of her kidneys removed, and she now drinks only green tea to cleanse the blood. She now stands about 4 feet 2 inches tall. She's an incredible shrinking grandma. And she allows herself 8 Players Light regular per day, whether she needs them or not, eh? She, even with the glaucoma, she can still knit faster than anyone I've ever seen without even looking down at her hands. Now, Patricia Cumming, that's my dad's mom. She was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in 1920, the daughter of Irish immigrants. She married below her, somehow, to this handsome Scottish boy soldier by the name of Don. Now, depending on who you talk to, where you get the story from, hey, I'm a real blue blood, as you can tell. My grandfather, he was a bit of a dreamer, hey, or possibly a bit of a deadbeat. Depends where you get the story. I mean, maybe he was just always searching down the next best employment opportunity for him and his young family, or perhaps he just couldn't hold down a job. We're not really sure about that, but the reality was that he moved his wife and his 4 young sons around a lot. From the prairie to the coast, to the island, to the interior, to the bush, up north, funny, from Saskatoon, Port Alberni, Nanaimo, what other great metropolises were there? Carmacks, Whitehorse, Dawson City, finally back to Whitehorse again, where he landed himself a job working on the Alaska Highway for the Highways Department. Now, Alaska Highway, you got to understand, is 1,521 miles of road built in a little over 8.5 months during wartime through frozen, unforgiving territory that never really wanted it there in the first place, okay? So getting yourself a job fixing up that aforementioned highway, well, was then and still is actually considered fairly steady work. So Pat and the boys, they grew up. They got Yukon jobs. They grew Yukon roots. And the boys went out, got Yukon girls pregnant. But not my grandfather. Now, I guess she was hoping that things would be better, hey? When the kids were a little bit grown up and she followed him over to New Zealand, because that was always his big dream, hey? Maybe he'd finally be happy over there with the sun on his back and the sand from the southern hemisphere between his toes. Maybe things would be different. She finally left him with a broken jaw in 1967. Came back to Canada on the boat by herself. She tells me the story almost 50 years later, how she pulled a car over side of the road just outside of Vancouver, stared at all those road signs for a long minute. And my grand, she laughed through her nose by letting air out of her nose like this. I figured I had 2 options, she said. I could go east, back to my mother. Or I could go north, back where there was people I loved, people who loved me back. So she rolled that car and totaled it 3 times, hey, just over the Yukon border, just before Watson Lake. And she ironically hitched a ride into town with the postal truck driver, didn't she?